Can the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia keep it together? Change has become increasingly bloody, it seems, since the 2012 death of longtime leader Meles Zenawi. Meles, a Tigrayan whose home region is now in open revolt against the central government. There, conventional fighting is morphing into guerrilla warfare, with reprisals against civilians that are fueling a vicious circle. Elsewhere, regional and ethnic tensions are also on the rise. In the middle of it all, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is on the campaign trail ahead of June general elections. The poll was originally scheduled for last August, but delayed due to COVID. We'll ask about the viability of the vote in conflict areas and whether the election will bolster or undermine the legitimacy of a leader who won the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize for bearing the hatchet with neighboring Eritrea, but who has since struggled to live up to his billing as a reformer and a reconciler. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking which way for Ethiopia. Joining us from Woodbridge, Virginia, just outside of Washington, Na'amin Zaleke of the Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, France 24, for giving us this opportunity.
And not too far away, across the Potomac in Washington, D.C., Tigrayan researcher and activist Meaza Gide. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
From New York City, Henok Gabiza, former president of the Oromo Studies Association. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
And with us here in the studio, Roland Marchal, a researcher at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po's Seri Research Branch. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. By the way, happy Orthodox Easter celebrations over the weekend in the ancient city of Lalibela, world famous for its rock-hewn churches. This year, fewer pilgrims, though, because of COVID, yes, and also because of the conflict further to the north in Tigray.
We're going to pray about the war in the country, the hunger in the country. The curse from God is getting worse. We pray to God to bring these things to an end.
Na'amin Zaleke, what does he mean when he talks about a curse from God?
Well, considering the many challenges converging in Ethiopia, locusts, unprecedented locusts, climate change, conflicts going on in many regions, I believe those who are faithful would consider this as a curse from God.
Your thoughts on where Ethiopia is today, 1 month again ahead of those elections?
Well, there are many challenges, as you know. In Ethiopia, there is conflict in Tigray. The government is trying its best to stabilize and rehabilitate Tigray. And there are ethnically related conflicts in various parts of the country due to 27 years of an ethnic federal system and a very toxic narrative that pits one ethnic group against the other. Despite all these challenges, majority of Ethiopians want to have peaceful and free elections, and they want to transition towards democratically elected government. Currently, there are over 47 both national and regional parties, organizations contesting the elections. They are competing, and as you know, there were 5 elections under the domination of the TPLF, EPDRF regime, and this one, with all measures, is relatively competitive and relatively free, if not absolute, than the hitherto held elections, which are sham elections, won by the TPLF-dominated EPDRF at 100%, which was ridiculous and preposterous.
But they say they're not ready for those elections, that half the voter rolls have not been updated.
People are registering. I know that in the Oromia region, over 12 million people have registered. In Amara region, over 5 million. In many other regions, there are registrations going. Of course, in Tigray and some parts of western, eastern Oromia, like Walaga, due to the security situation, people are not registering. But for the most part, people are registering, and the government and the National Election Board is urging Ethiopians to register.
Meazagide, your thoughts on where Ethiopia stands now and where Tigray stands now?
Yeah, thank you so much. Ethiopia, for all technical and practical purposes, is a failed state right now. We're talking about a regime that is ultimately confined to Addis Ababa without any legitimacy, capacity, or authority to govern the entire country. There is an active state-sponsored genocide happening upon the people of Tigray in Ethiopia. What's happening in Tigray is not just a conflict, it is an active state-sponsored genocide whereby the Ethiopian government and foreign forces, particularly the Eritrean government, and also internal militia forces from Amhara region are actively massacring innocent Tigrayans in the dark. So this is what's happening in Ethiopia, and there is no talk of election because all of the dominant and viable candidates or opposition political leaders are either arrested or massacred or killed. You have a prominent political activist and politician from the Oromos, particularly Jawar Mohammed, Baqqala Garba, and others in jail. And you have members of the TPLF, a political party that is resoundingly supported by the Tigrayan people, fighting, trying to defend its people and its territory. So the talk of election is laughable. It is something that is being done in order to further legitimize the genocidal regime that is now confined only to Addis Ababa, the capital city of Ethiopia. Other than that, no one is really registering all the numbers. Mr. Na'amin was mentioning these are numbers fabricated by the Ethiopian government and its cronies in order to confuse the international community to believe that things are well and fine in Ethiopia and that there might be a glimpse of election, but that's not true. People are actually protesting. Most of the important and political parties with an alternative policy have actually protested the upcoming election. And Ethiopia, for all purposes, as I said, is a fragile and a very failed state.
You heard Naaman Zeleke talk about 27 years where it was, as he put it, minority rule. But do you get the sense that there is this feeling of that there are people who want revenge?
People like Mr. Na'amin Zeleke do indeed want revenge, but that revenge comes from the notion that TPLF, alongside other political parties in Ethiopia, have instituted a political system and a constant arrangement that enabled minorities and majorities to coexist. People like Mr. Zeleke have been preaching for the extermination of the people of Tigray for over 10 years now. So they have been calling for that, and the revenge comes from that narrative, a narrative that says Tigrayans have wanted to be, the chosen people in Ethiopia. We have never
That's a strong charge.
What happened.
Calling for extermination. That's a strong charge.
This is serious.
It is, and it's something. It is something I can. It's something I can. If I may finish, it's something I can back with an evidence. Mr. Malik.
One at a time. First,
Meazza. No, Mr. Selek. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. If I may just finish, it's not just an accusation, it's something that we can back with an evidence. Mr. Zeleke was the head of a TV station in 2016 that clearly called for the extermination of the people of Tigray. They say the people of Tigray are only 5% of the population, and it doesn't take that much to exterminate all of them. This is what they said. It's on record. We can provide you with the evidence, and you can see it for yourself. So we're not just making accusations, we're actually stating facts. Fact is that Mr. Zeleke, the TV station that he was heading, called ISAT, has been propagating for the past 10 plus years. So Mr. Zeleke was also in Eritrea not long ago, working with the Eritrean government to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ethiopia. So the things we're saying are not things that transpired in November 4th, but these are things that people like Mr. Zeleke have been working for over 10 years now.
Naaman Zeleke?
Yes, Nada, she knows deep down her that she's telling lies, gross misrepresentation of our positions. So I have struggled for democracy and human rights for 27 years against what all objective analysis, both Ethiopian and non-Ethiopian, Europe, America, and all the institutions, held as a highly repressive, minority-dominated regime of Mullah Zenawi and the TPLF. And this is a fact that you can find in many studies. I don't have to say it. Now, what we say throughout is that this regime, under the veneer of a developmental state or a federal government, the real power resided under a minority TPLF, which dominated the economy, control for 40%. It dominated the security and the military command and control. 90% of the commanders were Tigrayans, and this is a fact, and there are evidence-based studies. Now, this doesn't mean that we're anti-Tigrayan people. Tigrayan people are our people, they are our mothers, our brothers, and our sisters. But a cruel, quasi-Nazi, fascistic TPLF that claims to represent the Tigrayans was
all right, so
unleashing human rights violations throughout Ethiopia, and it had instituted an ethnic federal system where it pitted each and every ethnic group against the other, and because of that, thousands of people have been massacred throughout their reign.
All right, so strong accusations.
Were in torture chambers throughout Ethiopia, and these are facts which Maada Gday would like to deny, unable to admit, and this has been her playbook since this conflict started.
All right,
on November 4th, Maada Gday and her friends have launched
Naamin Zelek, strong accusations there from you and from Meaza Gidi. Let's talk about the present now, and we'll begin with you, Henok Gabiza. At this point in time, what do you do if you're the leadership of Ethiopia when it comes to Tigray?
So thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I would like to say a few words about the political difficulty of the current Ethiopian situation. So all these chaos and messes, political messes that the country is experiencing can go back to the clash of political visions that exist in the country. We can sum it up into two main domains of clash. One, there are a group of politicians or a group of political elites who believes in bringing back the old Ethiopian way of centralizing and unionizing power into a single hand. And then there is a group of political domain that believes in the multicultural, multinational, and multi-societal background of Ethiopia, which is the reality. And the only way to reconcile these two visions is by coming back to the drawing board, discuss the differences, carve out a transitional terms that might be acceptable or at least less offensive to differently diametrically opposite political visions. Apparently, the Prime Minister, who is greatly inspired by the political vision of the Menelik, the Haile Selassie, from the time of monarchy, is obviously in clash with the reality on the ground. So the war in Tigray, besides some implication of revenge for the past 27 years, which could have been addressed within the framework of reconciliation and restorative justice, instead of pursuing restorative justice, which actually all of us were hoping when the Prime Minister came to power and made a moving speech in DC, in Ethiopia, in Mekelle, and everywhere, when people were so ambitious to believe that this is going to be a restorative justice, peace is finally coming to Ethiopia, democratic election is coming to Ethiopia. But instead of pursuing that original plan, the Prime Minister resorted to the idea of revenging what has happened in the last 27 years. Second of all, I am not exactly sure if the Prime Minister has the moral ground to even pursue revenge, because he himself has been part of the last 27 years of oppression. So if you ask me, the current situation in Ethiopia, the last 27 Ethiopia was mainly authoritarian regime that was at least trying to pursue authoritarian development agendas, which is not really happily welcomed by all. But the current Ethiopia is a country that is absolutely going back to the conflict zone. So Ethiopia is not anymore a post-conflict nation. In all honesty, in all fairness, the last 27 years with all problem of human rights record, all problem of political crisis, we can fairly conclude that Ethiopia was a post-conflict nation. But again, brutally authoritarian. But at the moment, Ethiopia is purely and squarely a conflict nation. When conflict nations are characterized by armed conflict, if you see the war in Tigray and the war in Oromia, where Oromo Liberation Army, who has been in existence since 1970s, with the hope of bringing a platform for the Oromo people to have their say in that country, because the Oromo people had never been asked in the history of Ethiopia about what they want in Ethiopia. There has never been an election. There has never been a referendum. So that's what the Oromo Liberation Army and the Oromo Liberation Front were established for and still doing. So all of these chaotic political crises added together are now leading Ethiopia into a clear path of dissolution, and even a violent dissolution at that. Nobody would like to see a violent dissolution in Ethiopia. So that's where the country stands at the moment.
Roland Marshall, you just heard there Henok Gabiza
Yes.
painted as a choice between the federal system or more centralized system. Is that what's at stake right now?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we see very well, we could identify political elites who are pushing for a more centralized system, and others who clearly wants this federalism, this ethnic federalism, to move ahead and develop. And actually, some states are even going to be created. The problem is there is no discussion. And this way, I believe to a certain extent that we are still in a vicious cycle that started somewhere in the early 1990s, where people have a lot of difficulties to talk to each other about conflicting ideas about what the Ethiopian state should be.
Was there a window of opportunity to open that discussion in 2018?
I strongly believe that when the new prime minister was elected, there was a window of opportunity, not very long, for maybe a couple of months, where those kind of discussion could have been put on the table.
Now is it too late?
I believe that was closed by the end of 2018. And of course, as the international community took some time to realize that actually the trend wasn't exactly corresponding to what Abiy Ahmed said at first, and therefore this Nobel Prize. But certainly we see those authoritarian trends materializing in many aspects, including in his own Oromo state over the months and for quite some time. And this is certainly a problem that should be talked about. I mean, we could expect in elites to discuss those issues, but in Ethiopia it seems that there is a culture of top-down, and maybe there is a vision of the prime minister that makes all those this freedom of speech about important issue, about hearing conflicting ideas about what Ethiopian state should be, what should be development, and that sense that makes an agreement difficult. And I believe, like most of my colleagues here, that as well make the elections very perilous.
All right, we're going to talk about when we come back, and as well the implications for the region as a whole. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. 1 month ahead of a general election in Ethiopia that had been postponed last year. We're wondering which way forward for the nation, with that conflict in Tigray in the north, now in its seventh month. We're talking about it with Naamin Zelek, who joins us from Woodbridge, New Jersey, of the Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus in Washington, D.C. Tigrayan researcher and activist Meaza Gide is with us. From New York, Henok Gabiza, former president of the Aroma Studies Association, and Roland Marchal from the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Last week, the United Nations talked of aid disrupted for many by the 1 million that have been displaced in 6 months by the conflict in Tigray. Aid agencies accusing forces from neighboring Eritrea. The French news agency AFP last week got access to Ethiopian government documents that accuse Eritrean soldiers of blocking and looting food aid, prompting this reaction from Asmara, a statement that was sent by email by the information minister. No way that Eritrea can block humanitarian assistance or loot them. Back in March, Ethiopia's prime minister had publicly distanced himself from human rights violations blamed on Eritrean troops.
The Eritrean army crossed the border and was operating in Ethiopia. Any damage it did to our people is unacceptable. We can't accept this from them. We wouldn't accept it if it were our soldiers. Our military campaign was against clearly targeted enemies, not against the people.
So that was a statement from March by Abiy Ahmed. The United States last week calling for a cessation of human rights violations in Tigray, putting pressure on both Eritrea and Ethiopia.
We have heard the Eritrean government's public statement that it will withdraw its forces from Tigray, but that must still be implemented in practice. There is no evidence that such a withdrawal is underway. And any such withdrawal must be immediate and verifiable. We also call and continue to call for a withdrawal of Amhara regional forces from Tigray for an immediate end to the hostilities, all of which are critical to protecting civilians and ensuring unhindered humanitarian access.
Before we turn to the rest of the panel, Roland Marchal, so the accusation there is that there's the regular army from Ethiopia, the regular army from Eritrea, which came over, and then there are these militias. Who are they?
The Amhara militia and as well special forces, special police forces from Amhara state. And so they are, every state has its own way of managing security. Amhara state did this way. What is problematic for Abiy Ahmed is to have declared at first that it was an operation to restore law and order, and then to bring into Tigray a foreign army, because as far as I know, Eritrea is an independent country. And then, of course, we had many narratives, stories about human rights violations. Some maybe, again, that need to be cross-checked, but really the evidence has been mounting for months now, so it's very difficult to deny it. Another point that should be taken into account that may shed some light on the current situation elsewhere in Ethiopia is that Amhara militias took over land from Tigray to annex back to Amhara state. So I'm not going to decide, I'm not Ethiopian, they need a political arrangement, whether this land belongs to Amhara state or to Tigray, but the point is that doing so means that to a certain extent the internal boundaries of Ethiopia could be drawn in a new way as the crisis is unfolding in Tigray. And that's why you had incidents in other places in Ethiopia, and very serious incidents, not only, I would say, violent demonstration, but even armed clashes. And that raised as well a new issue that hasn't been discussed. Is Abiy Ahmed was very courageous, and I think we have to acknowledge that, in bringing back armed groups that were in exile in Eritrea, and but we know very well that when you bring back armed groups, you need a full process of, you need a political agreement, and you need as well, I would say, ways to demobilize those people, to reintegrate them into the society. This has not been done very seriously because it's very difficult, first of all, and therefore that adds to the violence we see in certain areas, especially between Oromos and Amhara's state.
Na'min Zalek, your thoughts on these Amhara militias taking part in the campaign in Tigray?
Okay, before that, allow me to make 2 points because there was a rehash of another false narrative by extremist ethno-nationalists who are responsible for current violence in Ethiopia, especially in Oromo region. Now, there is no vision on the part of the PM. As far as I know, I've been in a position that struggled for democracy and human rights in Ethiopia for 27 years, as I said earlier, to go back to the past, as Mr. Debisa said. Now, the difference is there are some ethno-nationalists who have taken an extreme position and want to impose their will violently in Ethiopia, as is the case with OLF Sheni. As the commentator earlier said, sorry, I don't get his name, the PM has opened the political space, the media space, invited all opposition, including my group as in the leadership of G7. They are operating now under a political party, IZEMA, and 47 others who were unprecedented. During the time of the TPLF, opposition groups are operating. The only problem we have is some ethno-nationalist groups who have a hegemonic agenda, who have a secessionist agenda, who have used the ethnic card.
So do you put these Amhara militias in that category?
The Amhara militia, look, the Amhara militia is under the federal government. It is like asking the U.S. president, don't use the Maryland National Guard or Virginia National Guard when the capital was assaulted. So the federal government had to use the Amhara militia, the Afar militia, even the Oromo militia in Tigray because it was caught unprepared when the TPLF launched its attack, assault, a brutal assault to massacre 6,000 federal soldiers were in Tigray for 20 years. So it had to scramble, including bringing forces as far away from Somalia to deploy in Tigray. So it is the right of the Ethiopian government and within the sovereign rights of the Ethiopian people to use whatever force under its disposal to defend the sovereignty of
bringing in Eritrean soldiers. Bringing in Eritrean soldiers, is that a good idea?
Yes, I defend that. You know why? The TPLF raised 250,000 militia special force, prepared, well-planned, coordinated attack throughout Tigray. They disabled lines of communication. They organized Tigrayan officers in Addis Ababa to disable the command and control and communication. They assaulted, massacred 6,000 federal soldiers who were protecting the Tigrayan people for 20 years. At this stage, the federal government was caught, as I say, unprepared when the TPLF assaulted on 4th of November. 70% of the Ethiopian army was in Tigray. 70% of its heavy weaponry was in Tigray. Everything was assaulted by the TPLF, multiple attacks at multiple fronts, and the Ethiopian government had to call on the Eritreans to get in because some of let me bring in at the border of Eritrea and Tigray.
Let me bring in on this, Meaz Agide. Your thoughts on all the players that are present in Tigray right now?
Yeah, I am laughing because it's so sad. It's so sad people have to go such an extra mile to justify the massacre of innocent civilians, the raping and gang raping of innocent kids, girls as young as 4 years old in Tigray are being gang raped, not only by the Amhara militia.
One at a time, please. One at a time.
You never condemned 1,000 Amharas killed by TPLF.
Not only by Amhara militias, not only by Amhara militia, but also by Eritrean troops and Ethiopian national troops. It's also sad Mr. Zalek is talking about sovereignty while the very government that he's advocating for and supporting and is working for literally invited a